Hey friends, in this video I'm going to go over many different creative ways to create stereo width at the track level in Ableton. Likely everyone watching this video will learn something, even if you're a seasoned Ableton pro. Some of these methods are extreme, while others are very subtle, so I recommend using headphones to listen. So without further ado, let's get into these methods. Okay, so in this first example, here's just this basic FM bass. So we can hear that this sound has zero width, and if I tab over to session view, we can see on the VU meters, the left and the right channel are doing exactly the same thing. Another thing that you can do is you can use Ableton Utility, and so here, if you right-click on the width knob, you can see that you can switch it over to mid-side mode. Now in mid-side mode, if the knob is all the way over to the right, you get all the mid channel. So the sound shouldn't change at all from 100 up to 0. Let's make sure. Right? No difference in the sound. But as I move it toward the side channel, it'll get quieter and quieter until it's completely gone. Right? So what that means is that this is a true mono signal. The left and the right channel are doing exactly the same thing. So the first and maybe most classic way to make stereo width in a channel is to use a chorus. So again, how to make stereo? You make the left and right channel do different things. So in the case of a chorus, what it does is it simply copies the original signal and then detunes it. So on the classic setting, you have two copies of the original signal and they're detuned on the left and the right channel. So let's take a listen to the difference. Right, it's nice and wide now. And we can also see if we look at the meters that the left and right channel are doing different things, right? So again, without it, with it. You can see those left and right channels peaking up and down at different times, right? So again, making the left and right channel slightly different. Let's go ahead and build this effect up from scratch. So when I'm dealing with a bass sound, it's also important to try to preserve the sub and not add as much stereo width to the sub, because when you sum back to mono, frequencies can actually cancel each other out and disappear the lowest low end, which is not what we want in this case because this is our bass. So when you're dealing with chorus on bass, it's a good idea to flip this little switch here and then tune it up until you're leaving the low sub out of the chorus equation, okay? So take a listen to what happens when I turn the dry wet all the way up, and then I start to roll this up. So for example, here at 325 Hertz, we can hear that there's no more sub in the chorus signal. But as I pull the dry wet back, we're gonna start to hear that sub get reintroduced. And so that preserves our nice, thick, deep low end, but we've also now got some stereo information. However, now it's quieter, so I actually have to turn the output up. This output knob only affects the wet signal. So now I can interact with my rate, which is the rate of the detuning, and then the amount, which is the degree upon which things are detuned, and I can dial this in. So before, totally mono signal, after, a much wider signal. So in this next example, I'm going to use the same bass line, but it's going to be just a little bit more sustained so we can hear what I'm doing. So again, to create stereo width, we need to make the left and right channels do different things. So I'm going to load up a roar here, and I'm going to switch it over to just the single mode. I'm going to switch it over to my favorite clipping mode in roar, and that's the tube preamp. And so let's listen to this as I add a mount. I'm going to turn the output down to compensate a little bit. I love the growl of that. Now, one thing that you can do when you know you're going to be distorting a sound is you can distort the left and the right channels slightly differently from each other. So one thing that I've noticed that you can do with roar, and this works with any of the shaper modes, is to simply bias one channel differently than another. Listen to the effect of the bias. So right now, we still have a mono signal, albeit that it is biased slightly, right? So meaning that we're having a more asymmetrical distortion happening. So what I can do is I can right-click on this and choose Group. And this workflow can create stereo in so many different ways. But let's go ahead and group this. And now I'm going to reveal my chain list right here, which means these are all the different chains that are affecting this audio effect rack. And I can duplicate this roar. Now check this out. Now I have two roars. And if I pan one of them to the left and then one of them to the right, what I can now do is make them different from each other. Again, making stereo requires that you make the left and the right channel do different things. So I'll click on this roar and I'll bias it the other way. So now both of these channels have different bias, and now we're going to get a super wide sound. Without it. Now, of course, these aren't volume matched yet. So let's go ahead and grab a utility. And in this utility, we can do the same thing that we did in the chorus. Because we're dealing with a bass, we can click this bass mono switch, okay? And what we can do is we can roll it up until we've got all of the fundamental frequencies of the bass out of the equation, so we can still get that nice thick sub signal to be mono, but the stereo elements or the harmonics can be in stereo. And we should probably turn the gain down to match. And so the last step for this situation is I'm going to click on my audio effect rack, hold shift, click on the utility, and then Command or Control G to make a new audio effect rack so I can A/B this. So let's go ahead and listen to it without it. With it. That is just a giant bass sound, right? Okay, let's move on to the next example. So real quick, understanding stereo width is a deep topic, especially in a mix context. So if you vibe with me and my teaching style, I offer super deep and thorough online courses in Ableton Live that can help you achieve pro results. These are the largest and most feature-packed courses on Ableton available, and my ratings speak for themselves. If you want to learn more about that, the links are down in the description and comments. All right, let's get back to the video. So here's just an instance of drift, and I'm just making like kind of like a strummed pluck. Sounds like this. And so what I've done is I've actually used a reverb to, instead of create like what you would consider a normal reverb, I'm just using the early reflections part of it to create stereo width. Take a listen to this. And to my ears, this is such a natural and pretty sound to make. Let's go ahead and build this up using a reverb. So I'm going to go grab a reverb. So within Ableton's reverb, there's actually two building blocks to it. There's the early reflections and then the diffusion network. What I'm actually going to do is turn the diffusion network all the way down, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the early reflections all the way up. Now, early reflections in reverb basically refer to when you're sitting in a room, the closest reflections that are bouncing off the walls to your ears. Let's just take a listen to what this sounds like. I'm going to turn the dry wet all the way up. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the size down. So the size basically is determining the size of this room that we're listening to this sound in. So now we can kind of hear that this is maybe less of a reverb in the normal sense, and maybe more of just a stereo width adding. But it kind of sounds chorused, right? It sounds like we're just using a chorus. And that's because we have the chorus section turned on. So I'm going to turn this part off. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the amount down of my early reflections here in this spin control. Ooh, there it is. Right? Now we have what it sounds like, just a wide signal. So if I turn my dry wet all the way back here, and I listen to the original sound, we can hear that kind of basic, like vanilla kind of sound. As I start to turn this up though, listen to the width we're adding. Awesome. Let's move on to the next example. So here is just a classic impact or down sound. Now we can hear in this sound that there's some low end, there's some low mids, there's some bright top end and stuff like that, a lot of grit. Something that I've noticed in mixes is that if you're going to use down sounds, a lot of the time it makes sense to make them a little bit wider, especially if they've got low end in them, so they don't conflict with your bass lines and things like that. So what I've done here is I've used a shifter and I put it on ring modulator mode, and this is the result. Just this crazy panning, wild, nutso sound, right? Let's go ahead and grab a shifter and I'll show you how to build this. So if you switch over to the ring mode and you just go ahead and play this, what you're gonna get is this crazy like sideband material. It's gonna be really high pitched. Right? But if we turn the chorus frequency as low as we can get it, then we're gonna get more of like a tremolo. Right? That's because we're taking this internal oscillator, and we're multiplying it with the sound at the input. So what we can do is we can click this wide button. And then what happens when you click wide is you can see that the fine control turns into a spread control. And so what this will do is, again, we're going to be making the left and right channel different. So essentially the coarse frequency on the left versus the right will be offset. Whoa, right? And what's cool about this is that we're going to get the left and the right channel to beat differently against each other. You can make this totally wild by really going far away from the center. So because the spread is turned up so high, in this case there's 148 hertz of difference between the left and the right channel, we can now hear that it doesn't sound like it's kind of snaking around, it sounds like it's just wide, right? But in this case, I kind of enjoy this stereo tremolo kind of thing happening at lower settings. And this is a bipolar control, you can do this the other way too. Let's move on to the next example. Okay, so in this next example, here is an electric guitar. And this has 0 stereo width. Now check this out. I'm using what I call the Better Haas widener, which is a Ableton rack that I made that utilizes what's called Haas delay to create width. So without it, with it, without it. So the way that this works is you're simply delaying the left channel versus the right channel, and that difference in time is actually creating stereo width because, yet again, the left and the right channel are different. I'm not going to cover how I built this because there's actually a whole video that you can check out up here, and you can download this device because it really makes widening with comb filtering a lot easier and a lot faster. Awesome. So the next example, this stereo effect is using EQ8 in left-right mode, but let's go ahead and listen to this sound first before we open it up. So this is a totally mono marimba. But what I can do is I can actually create a beautiful stereo sound by using an EQ, believe it or not. So let's go ahead and listen to the difference with the EQ. Without it. So to show you what I've done with this EQ, I'm actually going to expand it. And so what you can do is you can, on the EQ, you can choose the mode. By default, it's set to stereo, but if you choose left/right, what you can do is you can actually EQ the left channel differently than the right channel. Yet again, creating stereo width. So in this case, let's look at the left channel, and on the left channel, we can see that I have pulled down 100, 200, 400, and 800. Now, these are arbitrary numbers. You can shift this however you want to do it, but the reason I've done this is because using these whole numbers makes it sort of easy for my brain to create this effect. So on the left, we've got 100, 200, 400, and 800, and on the right, we've got 150, 300, 600, and 1,000. And you can also see that each one of these bands has a high Q count, like so the Q meaning how narrow this cut is. Now, I recommend doing cuts instead of boosts, and the reason I'm recommending that is that it's easy to simply just turn the gain back up right here. And the reason I'm turning the gain up is because if you actually look at this, we're removing a lot of sound. If I left this at 0, for example, when I turn the EQ on, the signal would be a lot quieter. So turning the gain up of the entire instance of this EQ8, we can achieve a similar volume. Now, using EQ this way always surprises me. It sounds so awesome, right? There's something else that's unique about EQ8, and one of the features that I love about it is that you can use this scale feature right here. So what scale will do is that you can actually scale into the effect that this has, and I can make it wider by simply pushing the scale up. So check this out. Now, of course, with a 200% scale, the signal is going to get quieter, so I'm going to need to push the gain up. So again, without it, with it. So I think it's really worth checking out the left-right mode on the EQ. It's a really great way to make stereo. Okay, so next example. So in this case, I've just got kind of like a stabby kind of sound made with wavetable. Sounds like this. So what I've done is I've actually used an Ableton auto filter. The new auto filter that comes with 12.2 allows you to actually use comb filters to create stereo. So let's go ahead and listen to the result. Just an awesome, beautiful sound without it, with it. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how to build this one up. So by default, the auto filter is set on low pass mode, right? But you can choose different filters, and the one we're going to focus on is comb. Now again, comb filtering basically creates this wild effect where you have various and assorted notches in the signal. Now, right now, we're not going to make any stereo because essentially the left and the right channels are doing the same thing. But it really makes an interesting sort of like chorus effect, right? But what's awesome is that we can use the LFOs. And right now you can see that these LFOs have a slightly different phase to each other, 4 degrees of shift. So as I turn this up, we can hear some stereo. But if you increase the decoupling of these all the way up to 180 degrees, this will make them 180 degrees out of phase with each other. Check it out now. Just a totally super wide, crazy effect. I think setting the filter frequency up a little bit higher is a good idea, so again, that fundamental frequency doesn't get affected as much. Just a beautiful, huge, wide stereo sound, right? So in this example, I have somewhat of like a Boards of Canada, like Leeds type sound. So maybe something very obvious is that you can use auto pan to create stereo, right? Basically what you're doing is you're making the left and the right channel have a tremolo effect to them. So essentially when the left channel is turned down, the right channel is turned up, and then vice versa. But something interesting about auto pan is that it has a random feature. And what this will allow you to do is have a random stepped modulation on the left and the right channel separately, and it sounds like this. And of course, you can make this wider by turning the width up, and essentially that will further decouple the left and the right channel. Now, thus far, this is a pretty stupid effect, right? But check this out. The rate of this can go up so high that it's imperceptible that this is stepped, and it becomes audio rate. And if I turn the amount down and then the shape up, I can get these really, really, really wide and really far apart from each other. And this creates somewhat of like a stereo static. So to me, this is a really interesting lo-fi sort of approach to this widening. Super cool. But I think an even better way to do this is actually to use an LFO, Ableton LFO, modulating the panning of a utility, because there's a lot more options inside of the LFO. Let's go ahead and turn the depth all the way down, and let's listen to this as it gets introduced. Now, the reason that this is better, in my opinion, is that you can use this ×10 switch here to basically be able to spin this LFO up super, super fast, right? So that's without the 10x switch on, but when I turn the 10x switch on, take a listen. And if you turn the smoothing up a little bit, you'll get that note out of there. Right now you can hear this like clear note. Now, what does that sound like to you? That's actually ring modulation happening. But if you turn the smooth up by 1%, take a listen now. I can still hear that note, but just barely. And to me, this is a really interesting lo-fi effect. Awesome. Let's move on to the next example. Now, in this case, we've just got a meld pad. And yet again, it's totally mono. What I've done actually here is I've decided to use a Redux, and I've decided to use Jitter to make the static effect, yet another sort of lo-fi approach, to make it wide. Take a listen. So let's grab a Redux and I'll show you how this is achieved. So essentially with Redux, you can of course turn the sample rate down, right? And in this case, we're creating some pleasing like top-end material, right? But another thing you can do is you can actually add randomness to the downsampling process, basically making the left and the right channel have different rates. So check this out. We can hear this big, wide, like noisy kind of thing getting introduced. So this is a way of adding like stereo noise to this pad. Now, this might be unpleasing because there's so much bright top-end weirdness happening. So another thing you can do is turn on the post filter right here, and then you can kind of adjust it to your liking. Whenever you turn on this filter, 0 is actually the center. So when you turn this on, it might be a bit lo-fi. So what you can do is you can actually crank it up a bit. And now we've got this really pleasing sort of like lo-fi wide noise, right? Super cool. So in this example, I've got this bass line. Check it out. So something that Ableton Roar can do that's really interesting is it has these last two different modes in it. One of them is called noise injection and the other one is called shards. So both of these are actually stereo in nature. And so let's go ahead and listen to the noise injection. Just such a pleasing sound. So with the amount all the way down, we can already hear that there's some stereo information. So without it, and then with it. Just such an awesome, pleasing sound. And so let's go down to shards. And similar to noise injection, we can also create stereo information because the bias is different on the left and the right. Just such an awesome effect, right? Okay, so in this next example, I'm using Roar again, but this time instead of focusing on the shaper, I'm actually using the new Dispersion Filter. Now, what's interesting about the Dispersion Filter is that if you make two copies, again, I'm making two copies of this signal with a slightly different setting on the Dispersion Filter, and I'm getting this beautiful sound. So without it, and then with it. Just a massive sound, right? And we can emphasize this by, of course, changing the dispersion settings and making them more decoupled. Now, you might have noticed that I have a utility at the end of this. Again, when you're processing bass like this, you really want to leave the sub or the low end portion of it unaffected. So without this, it's just going to be like just unmanageably wide. And that would just never translate. So what I'm doing is I'm, of course, filtering out everything under 180 hertz here, and then I actually can turn up the width of everything else. You don't have to be afraid of making the higher frequencies or the harmonics of the sound higher in width. Because I'm preserving that low end, right? Just such an awesome sound. I really am going to use this trick a lot moving forward in the future. All right, so in this next example, it's just a vocal. I recorded myself singing, "Make it wider." So let's use a pitch shifter. Let's use a pitch shifter to make it wider. So in the pitch shifting mode, you can actually click on wide, and what this will do is it will create two copies of the original signal and spread them left and right and then detune them, yielding this result. Make it wider. Which, of course, because the left and the right are detuned, you get that super wide kind of sound. And I can turn down the dry wet. Make it wider. And so what I've created for myself is sort of a weird, more controlled, if you will, chorusing effect. And if you increase the window size, you'll also get a bunch more delay, and that will also decouple the left and the right. Make it wider. Right? Kind of an interesting thing to do. Now, with the pitch shifter, you can also use the frequency shifter and do the same thing. Make it wider. But that's kind of a wacky effect, especially if you have the dry wet down. If you have it all the way up, though, make it wider. You can get some really weird effects going on right there. I've always enjoyed, though, this classic like 50% dry wet trick with the wide mode. Make it wider. For like alien kind of sounds. Okay, so in this next example, I'm using Granulator 3, but I dropped that vocal sample into Granulator 3 and I've got this effect. Make it wider. And as you can hear, that's a really, really wide sample. Let's go ahead and grab a fresh granulator. So here's a fresh granulator, and the way you do this is you take your sample and drag it and drop it in. Now the next thing you want to do is play C3, but of course it's not going to scan through the audio unless you turn up scan a little bit. So in this case, if I just make it scan at 1x, that means it'll basically play back at the speed that I sang it. Make it wider. But something cool you can do is you can turn up spread. Make it wider. And so basically we're detuning the left and the right channel away from each other. Now, pro tip, if you want to make this sound even more fun, you could maybe turn the scan down just a little bit. Make it wider. And then you're going to get that classic granulator kind of sound. Another thing you can do is go down to cloud mode and then go to your grain size and crank up the density, meaning that there'll be just be more and more of you, right? Make it wider. So you can make a giant, super wide choir of yourself, right? So speaking of granular, this next example, we just have that same guitar from before, but we're using a grain delay to create kind of random sprays of delay on the left and the right channel. Take a listen to this. Now using grain delay sort of goes into using like delay or like a reverb effect. This definitely gives the guitar the impression of being inside of a room, right? But if you keep the delay time really low down here, we can hear that we still achieve that stereo effect, and it sounds like we're kind of closer to the guitar than it would be if we were listening to the guitar in a room. And so with higher spray amounts, you're going to get different random delay times, and let's go ahead and listen to what it sounds like when it's more wet. Right, that's pretty weird, right? But with these low settings, we've got a subtle widening effect going on there. So that's a pretty cool trick using the grain delay. Okay, and then in the final example on this sound from before, the drift plucks, I'm using Spectral Time to create a stereo effect at very low delay times. So let's go ahead and load up a Spectral Time, and I'll show you how to do this. So if you take Spectral Time's delay and you turn it way down, we've only got 10 milliseconds of delay here. But what we can do is we can actually turn up this stereo right here, and then either the tilt or the spray control will now do a similar thing to grain delay, but what we're going to do is we're going to have the left and the right channels have slightly different delay times. Now, spray might be a more natural sound. Let's go ahead and listen to what happens when we do tilt. A little bit weirder, but let's go ahead and use this spray control. Spectral Time is such an interesting delay. I love this thing. And changing, pro tip, changing the resolution size at the cost of a bunch of latency will actually get you some more hi-fi results. So I'll put it up on Ultra now. So we've got that really pretty kind of like wide, bright sound, right? And of course, in this situation, I would definitely record the output of this and then delete the Spectral Time from my set because it would be adding, 116 milliseconds of latency, which we don't want to, keep that in our set, right? Cool, so as you can see, there's so many different ways to make stereo width. And again, I focused on the track level in this video. If there's enough interest, and if you're interested in this, let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see kind of like a big list of different ways that you can achieve width in a mix context as opposed to down at the track level. Either way, thanks so much for watching, everybody. If you enjoy this kind of thing, like, comment, subscribe. Love you. See you next time.